Dear friends, the Council for New Europe, or the Center for New Europe, is glad to welcome you here again. The European Initiative Center has contributed greatly to this event, and without their assistance, there could be no foundation, so to say, for our today's discussion. So we asked the foundation to include a number of questions in their questionnaires within the framework of this research. And it was for the first time, or it's for the first time, that we have the report, analytical report, on the whole number of trends that, for the first time, by the way, was surveyed in 2015. So this report includes the comparison between these two sets of data of 2015 and 18. And also, specifically, what was included was the attitude of the population of Ukraine towards the assistance from the United States of America. What are the expectations, or what have been the expectations of the population of Ukraine in this respect? So all our esteemed speakers will have an opportunity to speak out. I would describe them as the key players who are decision makers at the same time, and who can clearly articulate also the expectations of the Ukrainian authorities, of the Ukrainian government, and also from the EU side. We are very grateful to Ambassador Mingarelli for his participation in this event. What are the conclusions of this report? First, one is that, in general, the Ukrainians treat positively external aid, and the percentage of the population that are not in favor at all of any foreign assistance is quite small. And we can say thus that the overall attitude across Ukraine is positive. On average, all types of assistance that we analyzed had the expectations and the level of support at around 15%. But that's the average. And for example, if we speak about the EU participation and assistance, many Ukrainians, 28% of the Ukrainians said that they expected more pressure from the EU on the government of Ukraine for the acceleration, or towards the end of the acceleration of reforms in Ukraine. And I think that the Ukrainians do not trust the authorities, therefore, thus this expectation as of the external assistance and influence, even as an instrument of acceleration of some reforms that would bring about better quality and standards of living. That's as far as the foreign assistance is concerned. Another dimension that we analyzed in this report was in the security realm and safety realm. Some of the respondents, and I would say 16.3% was the exact figure, the 16.3% of Ukrainians expected more open opposition on the part of the EU member states towards Russia. And every fifth Ukrainian also expects some assistance to Ukraine in this realm. Somewhat negative trend is, in our view, and it's more towards the east of Ukraine and the south of Ukraine, where the higher is the percentage of the people who are opposed to the assistance from the United States. But on a positive note, 17% of Eastern Ukrainians expected, for example, specifically from the United States, some kind of assistance that would contribute to to more progressive development of civil society and its institutions in this country. So we can say that they expected support of the grassroots initiatives of the citizens, the citizenry of Ukraine. If we speak about this comparison of the data of 2015 and 2018, we can see that this position of a number of Ukrainians expecting stronger pressure from the EU on the government of Ukraine for the acceleration of reforms and improvement of the quality of life remained, it practically remained stable. And if asked what's their attitude if towards the continuation of the path of Ukraine towards Western Europe, even without the assistance, direct assistance from the EU, some Ukrainians, or we can say even substantial percentage of Ukrainians, said that if that was related, if that path was related towards reforms, then they were in favor of such movement in the direction towards the EU. 17% though said that the so-called European reforms that have occurred in this country so far have not been needed. And there was also a number of respondents who thought, about 4% of the people who said that the political course of Ukraine should altogether be reoriented towards the Russian Federation. Now I would like to turn the floor over to the representative of the Democratic Initiatives Foundation and let him say a few words about the expectations of Ukraine, especially within the context of its pro-EU orientation. Well, thank you, Sergiy. When we mention the fact that, or the ability of the EU or of the United States to contribute to Ukraine's movement towards the EU and towards the implementation of economic reforms and so on, we anyway practically acknowledge this fairly substantial foreign influence in this country. Therefore, when we started asking our citizens about their view of that, we wanted to get not only the quantitative but also the qualitative dimension of their attitude. When at the end of August we conducted our survey, our polling practically, 86% acknowledged the existence of foreign influence, strong foreign influence on the government of Ukraine. It's not the foreign government, as some people, some journalists used to call it even, that Ukraine is governed from abroad, but still a lot of people are concerned about with this, with this dimension of our political realities. So we are also of the opinion that certainly we should not negate the existence of this influence. The extent to which this influence is effective, is serious, this is open to debate. The citizens of our country that were questioned in that polling, their opinions also diverged significantly. Those who speak about foreign influence in Ukraine, only a quarter of the respondents defined that influence as decisive, as the one that determines the activities of the government of Ukraine. When asked about the subjects of that influence, the largest percentage point, 54%, mentioned the United States, and then there was the European Union in the second place. Fairly significant percentage, 39%, indicated the influence of the Russian Federation. And among the other foreign favorite agents, so to say, of this influence, the IMF was mentioned by a substantial number of the respondents. The nature of that influence is evaluated rather interestingly. We wanted it to be evaluated according to, or on the scale from the negative to positive influence. And the positive balance, so the amount of positive assessments versus negative, the positive balance was with the European Union, it's 26%. Then the OSCE was mentioned, and the transnational companies whose balance was 5% more positive than negative. Speaking about the negatively affecting agents, foreign agents, the IMF was mentioned with minus 29%. And I would say that given the overall negative assessments in the media and in the society of the IMF and its role, I'd say that this percentage can still be considered, quite neutral, I would say. Speaking about geographical divergences or differences in these influences, for example, the powerful influence from the United States is perceived as such to a larger extent in the east and in the south of Ukraine, more than 60% of the population. In the western part of Ukraine, only 40%, so much less. And if we speak about the Russia's influence, for example, in the western part of Ukraine, the tendency is towards the larger part of the population, considering it a strong factor of influence, external influence, and in the east, much less. In the east of Ukraine, 78% think that the EU is a significant factor of influence, and in the central part of Ukraine, 51%. But in the south, for example, 48% assessed the EU's influence negatively and 30% positively. So we have these regional differences, geographical differences, but I think it's a good. They constitute a good basis for analysis. Let me now turn the floor to His Excellency, the Ambassador of the European Union here. Let me, though, mention before he takes the floor about the expectations among the Ukrainians of financial assistance, especially from the European Union. In 2015, the number of people who expected any financial assistance from the EU was rather small, and it continued also until it has continued until 2018. So this notion of Ukrainians expecting only the money, only the funding from the EU is rather mythical in my view. What's Your Excellency? What's your assessment of these of that data, and how could it potentially affect any assistance from the EU to Ukraine?
I find the findings of this poll study assessment extremely interesting. no doubt about that. And on our side, we will look into details to these findings. We will have to digest them, and you can be sure that this kind of assessment is extremely useful to us. So thank you very much for providing us with this work. First point. Second point, I believe that we have to be a bit more precise with the words that we use. And I would like to clarify at least two words that you have been using constantly in this introduction: influence and assistance. Influence. Regarding the EU, we do not try to exert any kind of influence. The EU people, the Ukrainian people, and the Ukrainian leadership over the last 15 years have consistently said in a very clear way that they want to move closer to the European Union. They have negotiated an association agreement. The Ukrainian people has paid an extremely high price to get this association agreement implemented. And as a consequence, in the EU, we consider that we have to implement with our Ukrainian partners this agreement. This agreement has clear objectives: to deepen the political association of Ukraine with the EU and to promote the gradual integration of the Ukrainian economy into the EU single market. This is what the EU is doing in this country. We are not trying to exert any kind of influence. We are just cooperating with our Ukrainian partners to help them modernize the Ukrainian society and economy along the line of this association agreement, which has been negotiated by the Ukrainian authorities. You see what I mean? Exerting an influence gives a feeling that we try in a not very clear and open way to influence choices. This is not the case. For us, the Ukrainian people have to decide which kind of country they want to live in. And if they tell us, this is the case, we would like you to share your experience with us on how to have an open and democratic society based on a social market economy, we are ready to share our experience. But it is up to the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership to decide what they want to do within the country and in terms of foreign relations. And therefore, I believe that this wording, to exert an influence, is not the right one when it comes to the EU. You can use it for other external actors, but for the EU, I don't have the feeling as an EU representative here to try to exert an influence. I'm trying once again to put at the disposal of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership the experience that the EU has gained in developing an open and democratic society based on some kind of market economy. Second point, you talk about foreign assistance, foreign assistance, foreign assistance. Alors, first of all, I don't like this word. I prefer to speak about cooperation programs and not assistance programs. There is no need for Ukrainian people to be assisted. They are not beggars, with full respect for the beggars, by the way. And second point, if you look at the figures, the bulk of what we provide come under the form of loans, not grants. And you can speak about assistance when you speak about loans. The EU has been mobilizing over the last 4 years between 12 and 13 billion euros. But in these 12, 13 billion euros, 10 billions comes under the form of loans. Loans is not an assistance because you have to reimburse with an interest. And you have conditions attached to the loans. You see what I mean? So next time you talk about EU-Ukraine relation, forget influence, forget loans. Okay? He's not convinced. Huh? Okay. Bon. Now, on the substance. First of all, it is remarkable to see that a large majority, I don't remember the figure, of Ukrainian people consider that Ukraine has to modernize its society irrespective of an EU membership perspective, which today does not exist. This means that you have clever people in Ukraine. They understand that the Ukrainian economy, the Ukrainian political life has to be modernized for the sake of improving the living condition of the Ukrainian people, and not because one day you could have an EU membership perspective. And this is extremely important, because I spend my time explaining that you have to carry out a number of reforms for the sake of improving the condition of Ukrainian people, not because of the EU, of the fact that one day you could join the EU, but for the sake of improving the life of Ukrainians. So this is something which is, in my view, very important. Second point, you mentioned the fact that there is a lack of trust from the people in the leadership, not the current leadership, but the political class in general. And therefore, a lot of Ukrainians say foreign actors have to put more pressure on the authorities. It's clear that if we provide cooperation programs, loans, to reform some sectors, the energy sector, the judiciary, whatever you want, we have to say as well, these funds, these loans, these grants will be disbursed only if a number of steps are taken to reform the sector. Otherwise, it does not make any sense to mobilize funds. And therefore, we have to attach a number of conditions to our loans or cooperation programs. But at the same time, we have to be careful about the way we present these conditions, because it is up to the Ukrainian leadership, which has been elected by the Ukrainian people, to decide about the pace of the reform and the priority. So we have to fight the right balance between, on the one side, the need to attach conditions to our cooperation programs and loans. Otherwise, we would, to a large extent, waste the money of the European taxpayer. But at the same time, we have to do that in full respect of the sovereignty of this country and in full respect of what the leadership decide for the people who have elected this leadership. Third point, many people say in your opinion polls that we should support not only the state apparatus but the civil society. And this is right, because the civil society has been playing a decisive role in the modernization of this country over the last 4 years. But be aware of the fact that the EU, and not only the EU, foreign actors support constantly, financially and politically, the civil society in this country. We are doing that de facto. Another point, when it comes to the opposition to the Russian interference in Ukraine, Ukrainian people think of the US and not of the EU. It's our fault, probably, but you should be aware of the fact, and we should better communicate on the fact that the EU have put in place 3 series of sanctions against Russia since 2014, and these sanctions have been extended every 6 months unanimously by the EU Council. And these sanctions represent a cost for Russia. So one could say the EU should do more. Why not? But at least we should, and Ukrainian people and leadership should acknowledge the fact that the EU has put in place these sanctions, which are a serious way to tell Russia, you have to stop your interference in Donbass. Crimea is and will remain Ukrainian, and all activities aimed at undermining the sovereignty of this independent country have to cease. So there is, without any doubt, a strong EU position on in favor of the defense of the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of this country, and we have to better communicate on that. You gave me 10 minutes. I have already spoken 15 minutes, so I stop there. Thanks.
Дуже дякую послові Євросоюзу Hugues Mingarelli. До слова запрошую.
Thank you, Ambassador Mingarelli. Let me turn the floor over to Ms. Stefanyshyna, who is the director of the Government Office for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Well, Ms. Olga, your attitude towards Ms. Mingarelli's assessments and towards our report, and generally how you view the evolutions, possible evolutions in the relations between Ukraine and the European Union. Thank you, Serhii. In fact, a number of ideas that I wanted to speak about have already been mentioned by Ambassador Mingarelli, and let me start by saying that the very path of economic reforms and transformations has significantly been influenced by, or resulted even in, to a large extent, stemmed from the policies and attitudes of the European Union. Among the somewhat unexpected results of this survey, I'd say that it strongly reflects the media, contents of the media and media campaigns, of which we have been all witnesses recently. Therefore, I'd say that logically, for example, as far as the external influences are concerned, we should have that factor in mind. Then if we, assessing these results under the perspective of public opinion, we should say that it's only the tip of the iceberg, and we often, when trying to assess the results of our economic transformations, economic reforms, we often forget the amount of results that have already been achieved. For example, logistic infrastructure development strategy, the other strategies for specific sectors of Ukraine's economy. We believe that the implementation of the reforms, the continuation of the implementation of the reforms in the other sectors of Ukrainian economy would approximate Ukraine's economy to that, or with that, of the European Union. Let us not forget also about the 2 years of free, visa-free regime for the Ukrainians, and also a number of other simplification and anti-bureaucracy, I would say, anti-bureaucracy measures and reforms in Ukraine. Both the European Union and the United States have provided substantial funding for these reforms. and not only financial funding, but other types of assistance. For example, a large number of laws, of acts that have already been, enacted. Therefore, when we speak about specific infrastructural projects, we need to take into account these positive transformation. Therefore, I would like also to highlight that our Euro integration aspirations are supported more and more strongly by the EU, and the process of as this Euro-Atlantic integration processes are fairly formalized, maybe sometimes not all rank-and-file citizens can feel immediate results of these processes. And let me thank you again, and your foundation and your center, for the participation and particularly for this report, for producing this report. Thank you. Thank you, Olga, especially for your appreciation of our work. It's particularly a pleasant factor. Now, the floor is given to Mr. Leshchenko, who is the Deputy Chief of the Department for Foreign Policy and European Integration of the administration of the President of Ukraine. Well, comparing the policies towards Ukraine of the European Union and the United States might not be correct, but if we take them within the context of broader context, like global influences and so on, how would you assess them, and especially the prospects of the improvement of the relations between Ukraine and the EU? Well, I would like to start by thanking the representatives of the New Europe Center and the other institutions, the Democratic Initiatives Foundation. For us, the most interesting was the dynamics that you managed to show in your report. And we believe that the data you quote deserves certainly some analysis, detailed analysis, and in-depth analysis. And I think that your report and the data that it included also has shown the need for even more active attitude, proactive attitude, if you want, of the European Union towards this dimension, this public opinion dimension. Especially when we mention these tensions in the east, in the Donbass, in the Sea of Azov basin, these controversies, and I think that we have the new illustration, so to say, to the Russia's activities or activism, if you want, in Mariupol, in the other areas along the Sea of Azov, and in the east of Ukraine in general. Therefore, we should try to stimulate even further the cooperation between Ukraine and the EU, Ukraine's cooperation with the United States. At the last Ukraine-EU summit, this idea of tutelage of specific European governments of certain areas in the Donbass, in our view, it could bring about better understanding of the positive role of the European Union so that people can better understand that it's not only financial assistance, but also political endorsement, if you want, of Ukraine's that is valuable for the government of Ukraine. Commenting on that attitude of the rather high percentage of people who negatively assessed the assistance from the United States, from the European Union whatsoever, I think this is, as you have rightly mentioned already, it's the communication shortcoming, I would say. Because some people perceive it as this cooperation is somehow imposed, especially if such actors are added as the IMF and these similar international organizations and institutions. And a lot of people start asking themselves and come to the conclusions that why do we need that assistance at all? Why do we need it for? What do we need it for? And we need to explain better to our citizens these relationships between the causes of things and the consequences. We need to be more clear about Ukraine's need, the fact that Ukraine needs more the assistance from the IMF than the IMF needs anything from Ukraine. And about the consequences, economic consequences of somewhat deteriorated situation for some strata of Ukrainian society, I think that should be explained also too as something not related to any kinds of relations, economic relations with with foreign countries, especially with the United States and the EU. If we speak about assistance, as was already mentioned, it's not the assistance, we should not expect any assistance that is supposed to cover our own financial needs. Like, for example, they would finance the renovation of our roads or the construction of new infrastructure and so on. But rather this cooperation in the financial realm, it's a good sign for private investors, for foreign investors that could come up with their funds and invest in Ukraine. Therefore, this cooperation is a symbol, is a signal rather, for foreign investors that they can come and work in this country. And Ukraine, as you know, has a lot of resources, and if there are proper conditions for the foreign investors here to operate, then I'm sure that foreign direct investments could increase. In my view, very positive has been this last news about macro-financial assistance from the European Union. We very much appreciate it, as well as political assistance, both from the EU and the United States, is very much appreciated. Our positions on the Donbass, on the Crimean Peninsula, have been sustained by the EU and the United States and other large actors, international actors, and maybe, as was already mentioned, maybe some more active, some activism, some of higher degree, so to say, is called for, I mean, from the European Union. And although we understand the difficulty to reach a consensus among all 28 member countries, as we can see from the recent statements by the ministers, some ministers of certain EU countries, we are fully aware of that. But regardless of the fact whether we like it or not, we should take stock of it. It's a reality. If we speak about these assessments of foreign influence and, for example, the need for more active opposition or more open opposition on the part of the United States, especially against Russian intervention, then we should probably also explain to our citizenry better that the United States probably is in favor of more the soft power dimension opposition rather than anything else. And as I have already mentioned, this civil society dimension in our relation and the EU's assistance here have always been very positive, and we hope that with further development of these civil society institutions, even the foreign policy could be buttressed. Ukrainian foreign policy, it could support the Ukrainian government's efforts against revenges of any kinds from anybody. And I think that if at the level of the European Union a permission is given to supply lethal weapons to Ukraine, as was sometime a few years ago was done with respect to arms supplies to Iraq, I think that might also be helpful for Ukraine. My last remark regards the prospect of Ukraine's membership. It has happened so that the former Soviet Union republics have had their own logic in many respects. For example, they started with different formats of assistance, establishing different formats of assistance from the European Union. Then the association agreements were signed, and practically we arrived to the current day status when we have the free trade area with the European Union, which is not a static but dynamic environment, I would say, provides dynamic environment for the growing trade relations. In fact, the association agreement can be evaluated as practically the pre-accession stage, conclusion of the pre-accession stage, and I think that after it is successfully implemented, the association agreement is successfully implemented, we can raise the question about the accession of Ukraine to the EU. Okay, thank you, and now let us start questions and answers session. As we are running out of time, please just 3 questions, 4 questions. If you have no objections, I think we can collect, so to say, your questions, all 3 or 4, and then we will decide who of the speakers might answer them. Please introduce yourselves.
Ukrainian Press Institute, Mr. Kashinsky. My question is to representatives of Ukrainian governmental bodies and to Mr. Ambassador. So maybe the most important that prevents help is corruption. It was perceived so. And this question was not included in your research. And what prevents this help? And is corruption at the first place in this area why reforms are lacking? Next question. Andrei Megel, Institute of Liberalism. Question to Mr. Mingarelli. So we expect local and national elections, and how do you plan the work in this period? What will be expected during this period in your work? Sashko Kulchitsky, Renaissance Foundation. To Ruslan Karbachi, question about foreign influence. Maybe there are some interesting insights about sociological portraits about the groups of people who provide support, how they perceive this foreign influence. One more question. I asked about whether there is a difference between perception of foreign influence, the people who are in different groups of income, different social groups, and how these groups perceive the support of Ukraine by by the US and by European Union.
Questions to His Excellency and the representatives of the Ukrainian government. First question, Ambassador. Some of the diplomats of EU countries represented here in Ukraine and some of the opposition leaders in Ukraine mentioned that the conditions for the macro-financial assistance were very soft, especially for the first installment, so that in order to make sure that Ukraine will basically get them before elections, before the end of the year and then before elections. Do you feel that this has some grounds, I mean, this kind of statements? And the second question, very short, I've heard some Ukrainian officials claiming that EU's assistance is only loans and no support in terms of grants. Is it true? And this is also for the Ukrainian representatives, to what extent we can take this as a true statement. I mean, thank you.
Дуже дякую. Підемо по порядку. Перше запитання
So the first question about corruption as the main obstacle for provision of help from international partners of Ukraine. Maybe this question is to Mr. Ambassador, whether corruption is an obstacle for cooperation with Ukraine.
Corruption is, without any doubt, a very serious problem in this country, and it is a problem, first of all, for the citizens of Ukraine, far more than for the foreign donors. It is a problem for the citizens of Ukraine because this has a direct impact on their living conditions, and the fact that people may have to pay a bribe to be decently cured in a public hospital or this kind of stuff, this is something which again has a negative impact on the living condition of Ukrainian citizens. Second point, it is clear that Ukraine, which is a country with fantastic assets, could get far more foreign investment if the rule of law would be better enforced. And therefore, it is important that together with Ukrainian authorities, we do everything possible to improve the situation when it comes to the rule of law. And you can be sure that in our dialogue with the Ukrainian authorities, as well as in our cooperation programs, everything which is related to the rule of law, to the reform of the judiciary, to the reinforcement of free media, of the civil society, to the reform of the civilian security sector, all these elements received a lot of attention from the European Union because we know, on the basis of our experience, that it is important to do better and more in Ukraine in this area.
The next question is also addressed to you, Mr. Ambassador, about elections and
elections situation is clear. First of all, we hope that local election in the newly amalgamated Romada will take place by the end of this year. Second point, we hope obviously that the presidential and parliamentary election, which will take place next year, will be conducted in a decent way, so that the will of the Ukrainian people is reflected in the result of the election. On our side, obviously, we support the deployment of big teams of election observation mission. We will as well support the Ukrainian authorities to fight the cyber activities that some countries could be tempted to deploy in Ukraine to derail the election process. We have already put in place a number of projects jointly with Ukrainian authorities, and we are ready to step up our activities in this area. We will be extremely attentive as well to the media, because the media have to play a role in the election, and in this regard we are concerned about the situation of the public broadcaster, because we know that they are facing difficulties financially, and it's a pity, especially during an electoral campaign. We hope that it will be possible to improve the situation of the public broadcaster so that the Ukrainian citizens get decent information before the election. And we hope finally that the electoral campaign will not be a pretext to stop the reform process. We believe that it is still necessary and possible to carry out a number of important reforms in some specific sectors in the next few months. I hope I answered your question.
The next question, Mr. Ambassador, is also to you about soft conditions.
This is frankly, you say that some EU ambassadors claim that. It's a pity that they don't come to me to say that. Alors, you know that one of the conditions for the disbursement of the EU macrofinancial assistance will be to be on track with the IMF program. Do you consider that the IMF conditions are soft? If Ukraine is not on track with the IMF program, there will not be any disbursement of the EU loan. Is it a soft condition? I have not heard anybody telling that the IMF program was soft. Is it soft to raise the price of gas by 23%? It's not serious. I don't want even to answer this.
And EU gives Ukraine only loans and no grants for Ukraine.
Alors, here I give you figures. It's very simple. Over the last 4 years, the EU has put at the disposal of Ukraine 200 million euro per year of grants. 200 million euro grants per year. Plus, we have as well mobilized about 70 million euro under our humanitarian assistance, and these were grants as well. We have put in place 3.4 billion euro of macrofinancial assistance, plus 1 billion, which means 4.4 billion euro of loans for macro-financial assistance. Okay? 4.4 billion of loans. In addition to that, the European Investment Bank, which is the financial instrument of the EU, has mobilized 3 billion euro of loans. In addition to that, the European Bank for Reconstruction of Development, which is not an EU instrument, because in the EBRD you have the US, Turkey, Russia and others, but still the EU has an important role in the EBRD, they have mobilized as well about 3 billion euro of loans. So these are the data.
Thank you a lot. Представники органів влади, хто хотів би взяти на себе сміливість прокоментувати деякі запитання.
Speaking about the representatives of Ukrainian authorities, who would dare to speak Well, it's not about dare to speak or not dare. I would just like to comment on these macrofinancial indicators. I understand the logic of some of these assessments. The European Commission and the Ukrainian government, they have worked jointly, and therefore they have a mutual understanding, so to say. And Ukraine committed to creating the electronic system of verification and control of tax returns, of tax declarations. And we were convinced that the effectiveness, the effective functioning of that system, that was something next to impossible. That was one of probably one of the last tasks that we needed to implement to comply with the requests of the European Union. The unfortunate developments with that system, they probably provoked this, this negative, the growth, the outburst of this negative attitude towards the request, some of the requirements of the European Union. And one more comment. For the last 4 years, we have been implementing those aspects of the association agreement that didn't invoke significant funding requirements, significant needs for funding. It was like the approximation of legislation, the legal reform, and so on. At the present stage, Ukraine's efforts have been aimed at joining the COSME program, the other economic initiatives, and so now we are at the stage of the implementation of the association agreement, where we need to implement the whole variety of provisions of the agreement, and certainly these implementation efforts, they need funding, and we are only at the beginning of this path, so to say. We need to wind up our work now, because the next session is going to start here in a few minutes. Just a few seconds for your final comment. Well, our efforts have been focused on further development and intensification of our struggle against corruption, and we see more and better opportunities, even better opportunities for our cooperation with the European Union. And therefore, we do not only view our relations with the European Union as full of obstacles, but also the one that has good prospects. Well, we have not done any breakdown with respect to different areas, like, for example, education, age, and other sampling for analysis. I'm speaking about this for an influence factor that was mentioned. Well, we only have the geographical breakdown. In the east of Ukraine, there were 40%, and in the central Ukraine, it's 20%. But I'm sure that there could be age correlations and some education correlations, something else. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are interested in looking through our report more in detail, please find it on our website, and the foundation is ready also to supply you with all the materials of this report. Thank you for your attention.